Hey everybody, we're going to do a quick debrief on the argument prompt that you responded to with your spoken argument project. You're essentially looking at the idea you're gauging what degree humorists should be maybe recognized in society as valid critics who are able to say things that other criticizers can't say with a direct appeal. And so this prompt was based on the 2010 AP Lang argument prompt, which is here on the screen for you. It's based on a quote by Alain de Botton. Hope I'm saying that right. Where he describes the chief aim of humorists as to convey with impunity messages that might be dangerous or impossible to state directly. Now, you didn't have to directly comment or refer to this stimulus quote in order to respond to this question. But you do need to capture the spirit of the quote within your response. So if you completely ignored the potential for a humorist to be a social critic and you took a stance, something like, jokes should just be laughed at, humor is only for coping and healing, then you probably didn't score as well as a response that actually did take on this idea of humorist as a social critic, and was able to kind of respond to the prompt. So where it says write an essay that defends, challenges, or qualifies his claim about the vital role of humorists, again, you don't have to necessarily hash out his example in your response, but you do need to respond to the spirit of the example, which is to consider a humorist as a potential social critic who is able to deliver messages with impunity that otherwise might be too difficult or too controversial to get people talking about with like a serious or a direct appeal. And so that was something to kind of keep in mind too. If your score wasn't where you thought it should be, maybe if you kind of avoided the issue in the prompt, then it was going to be harder for you to really score a lot of points in terms of responding to this question. So a couple things I wanted to talk about just that I noticed in general. The first thing that trips some people up is they took a stance that was not really an arguable claim. And so this kind of ties back into what I was just talking about in terms of responding to the stimulus that's in the prompt. Again, you didn't have to like explicitly mention the stimulus quote in order to do well here, but you do need to kind of address the spirit of the question. And so in order to have an arguable claim, you do need to state an opinion, and that opinion needs to have valid and evidence-based reasoning to support it. So the other way I saw people struggle here was they made just an instinctive reaction to the question. Here's what I think about, humorists because I think that way. And so, they essentially just kind of listed out things that they believe about the power of humorists as social critics or about these other things without really spending a lot of time giving specific or clear examples or backing up their ideas with any reasoning. It was just sort of a statement of opinion across their entire presentation. And so while their claim might be valid and certainly might be opinionated, in order to make an arguable claim, you do have to maybe qualify a little bit or give yourself some room to kind of defend what you're saying with some details and context. So a lot of claims I think fell a little short and maybe limited the responder, because it took them into like an absolute kind of stance where there was no wiggle room. Humor is always this way or never this way. Some people kind of made an instinctive reaction before they really thought of examples to go with it. And so their examples ended up being kind of rambling or hypothetical, like it was entirely based on a make-believe construct, a what-if scenario. And so, again, like we've been talking about in class, I really encourage you to try to think of those relevant examples first when you're looking at a prompt, and then derive your claim based on what you can really argue within those examples that you already have in place. And so what I saw like as examples for these types of claims that kind of fell short, I saw the kind of like, I think humor is important to society because it makes people laugh. The kind of just sort of dismissing it as a joke claim. And I also saw some people that made pretty decent arguments about humor as a potentially offensive or divisive aspect of criticism. But some people also took a little bit of an absolute stance here, saying that humor serves no value in society because of its potential to be offensive, and that therefore people should not take it seriously as criticism, and they should treat it how it's supposed to be treated, right, as a joke. And so I think, if you take that kind of an absolute stance, you're really kind of like unfairly ignoring some of the power that like political cartoonists or late night talk show hosts or other satirists might have at getting people to discuss hard or controversial issues by leading into it with some humor. And so there was just not too many of these, but some people were kind of struggling to get a claim that was really going to give them a chance to argue fairly on the topic. And so the next element that I wanted to go over was, the examples and the evidence. After you have an arguable claim in your presentation, you should have maybe had these before you made the claim, but you need to have some examples and some evidence to go with it. They need to be two things. They need to be valid and they need to be specific, okay? And so it was the second factor that I saw, tripping some people up. Y'all didn't have a hard time coming up with valid examples of humorists in society. Where y'all were struggling was maybe how you represented those examples. A lot of people were pushing what I call a quantity argument. They were taking more of a general list kind of approach. And that's going to be less effective, not because there's anything wrong with a quantity argument, but in terms of getting deep into what you're trying to say and really giving a lot of detail that people in the audience can latch onto and try to understand, you're not going to get that with a quantity argument because it's very surface level because it's based on a list usually. And so like a great example that I saw a bunch of times, a lot of people use Trevor Noah as an example in this. They would say things like, Trevor Noah uses humor to share ideas and opinions about healthcare reform, President Trump, racial justice, and many other societal issues. Okay, the many other is like the easiest trigger if you're trying to recognize if you've fallen into like a quantity argument. Okay, if Trevor Noah has had such impact in all these different areas and so many different places, then it should be easy enough for you to find one really specific time where he was able to make an impact with his humor. Okay. And so what I'm trying to help you see is that your argument is going to be a lot more effective if you take that one time that's really vivid where his joke made a big impact and you're able to argue that case specifically, than it will be just listing out like, oh, he does this all the time. Okay. And so the stuff and things, quantity argument, it really leads to this kind of shallow commentary because you don't really have much to say other than listing that this person uses this comedy all the time to make social criticism. Okay. And so it just your response kind of falls flat after you sort of outline or summarize your point about the speaker. And so instead you want to go with something a little deeper, something like using the Trevor Noah example. Trevor Noah recently criticized the president's focus on important issues by reacting to a speech the president gave about increasing the water flow of shower heads to Whirlpool factory employees. This happened like a week ago. He joked that while most people get their best ideas in the shower, the president has the best ideas about showers. Okay? And so with this example, it's specific enough now that the audience can maybe see the context of the joke. And so now you, as the arguer, have something that you can actually analyze and talk about. And so if I'm trying to say that Trevor Noah was criticizing the president, all I have to do now is show that, the joke is something that's poking fun at the president's lack of focus on what, his idea of important issues is really something that's kind of silly. Okay, like the amount of water that comes out of a shower head. And so, if you have that specific example, you can kind of lead yourself into that line of reasoning much easier than you could if you went with something like Trevor Noah has lots of ideas about stuff and things that he shares all the time through humor. Okay. And so the final area where I saw people kind of struggling a little bit was in the commentary section. That's where you've already presented an example and you need to connect it back to your main idea, your claim. Okay. And so this is where you build that line of reasoning. You're answering questions like why and how. And so what I saw here a lot of times, and this is super common as you guys are learning how to do this stuff, y'all were telling me that your evidence connected with your claim without really showing me why or how it connects. Okay. And don't get me wrong, I trust you guys and I could see, valid connections between your evidence and your claim. But if you don't lay out those steps, then, and I'm the one left making the connections, then that's not your argument anymore. That's mine because I'm the one doing all the thinking and the logic to connect the example to what it is you're saying. And so I need to see that why and how. I need to see the steps in your logic so that I can follow it from your perspective and come to the same conclusion that you did. Because if you lay out your steps of reason and I can follow those steps of reason and I can draw the same conclusion that you did, then we're going to be in agreement. Okay. And that's going to be a very successful argument. And so for many of you in this particular example, the questions that you needed to answer were these. Why has the humor that you presented delivered an important and valuable social message to society? Why is it more than a joke? You need to identify what the joke is and then the message beneath the joke. Okay, some of you guys skipped completely over that. And so the other part that needs to happen is after you've kind of like revealed the joke and the message within it, you need to tie it back together by saying, how has this humorous delivery been better at delivering that message than just coming out directly and saying the message, okay, and a serious appeal. And so that would capture all the elements of what the prompt was really asking you to do if you could take an example and then follow through those commentary steps to connect it back to something that you're claiming, okay? And so lots of different stuff to think about. I think you guys have, if you came up with an idea, all these parts are in your head. You just have to figure out how you want to organize them so that you can present them really easily. And so here are your steps. After you read the prompt, think about those specific and relevant examples that you could use as evidence in the argument. You want to do that first. Then you want to analyze your examples to figure out what specific claims you could support with each example. Okay? You want to keep those steps that you use to connect the example to the claim in your head because you're going to need that later when you do commentary. Okay? You want to find the claim that all of your evidence and examples points to and then format it as that central idea, the thesis in your response. Okay, so when you're building your essay, you're presenting the claim that you developed in step 3. Then you're presenting each example that you started with in step 1. And then you're connecting the example back to that claim, which is the ideas, the steps that you're keeping in your head from step 2. Okay, and if you do it that way, the logical flow of information will happen much more easily from your head to the page.